In 2009, Sega produced the first game in their portable JRPG series, 7th Dragon, in Japan on the Nintendo DS. The 7th Dragon series is a bit of a mysterious game series in that only the 4th and final game in the series was officially localized for the West. For this reason, and probably the fact that 7th Dragon is one of the newer retro JRPGs without official translations, there's actually very little background information on 7th Dragon's development. 7th Dragon was produced by Rieko Kodama, developed by Studio Imageepoch, and directed by Kazuya Niinou, with music by composer Yuzo Koshiro. This team of developers is legendary. Rieko Kodama was an instrumental force in the production of some of Sega's best JRPGs, like the Phantasy Star series and Skies of Arcadia. Kazuya Niinou directed Trauma Center and the first Etrian Odyssey game at Atlas before directing this game. He also went on to direct Dragon Quest Builders 1 and 2. Yuzo Koshiro has been a musical force in far too many amazing games to list, but my personal favorites are Ys 1 and 2, ActRaiser, Streets of Rage, Sonic the Hedgehog, and the aforementioned Etrian Odyssey games. Art in the game was done by Akifumi Yamamoto, and the unique character designs were done by Moto. 7th Dragon is a turn-based RPG where players can create their own party of 4 from a set of character classes: fighter, samurai, healer, knight, rogue, princess, or mage. In addition to selecting the class, players also select portraits to represent their characters and can name them. The towns and world are explored from a top-down perspective, but this changes to a forward-looking view where you can see your party members take actions you select for them in battle. As far as gameplay goes, you can do quests for the various NPCs you meet. Like most RPGs, you can also purchase weapons, armor, and items in towns. Characters level up by accumulating experience points from defeated enemies, and when they level up, they get skill points that they can use toward learning the skills of their classes. Enemies also drop loot that can be sold for money, and depending on how much of certain kinds of loot are sold, new equipment becomes available in the stores too. In addition to random encounters on the world map and in the field, there are also extra powerful fixed encounters called dragons that drop more valuable loot and usually reward a lot more experience too. These are the encounters players will want to pull out all the stops to defeat, or temporarily run away to come back later when the party is stronger. If players fight monsters too close to the dragons, then the dragons will even join in the fight if enough turns pass. In dragon-infested areas, there's also the bloom, which is like a poisonous flower that fills a lot of the game's explorable areas, and it's extremely annoying to deal with while trying to fight powerful enemies. Defeating the fixed encounters cleans up the bloom. If the gameplay mechanics I'm describing sound a lot like Etrian Odyssey to you, that's no coincidence considering Kazuya Niinou directed the first Etrian Odyssey game just 2 years prior in 2007. Assuming they can weather a seriously challenging game, it will definitely appeal to players who enjoy the battle system and progression systems in Etrian Odyssey. 7th Dragon really just takes out the first-person dungeon crawling mechanics and replaces them with a more traditional RPG-style world map and top-down perspective for exploration. 7th Dragon is a very fun and very difficult game. This is one of the hardest JRPGs I've ever played through. I remember having to restart the game twice and refer to guides just to get past the beginning of the game. Apparently, I'm not the only one who thinks this game is tough. If you don't have a good plan with not only how to build your party for synergy at the start, but also how to most effectively allocate your skill points, you will pay for it later in the game when you can't defeat the simple encounters and bosses. The game is extraordinarily unforgiving if you don't do your research into the character classes and how they work together. All that said, 7th Dragon's high fantasy apocalyptic story takes place in the world of Eden. All manner of fantasy reptiles take over 80% of the world, led by 7 powerful dragons, and exercise extreme hostility toward the remaining humans. You control a hunter tasked with eliminating the 7 dragons and saving humanity from extinction. The story to the game is interesting and has some cool bits to it that actually tie in with parts of other games in the series. It also introduces several endearing characters you'll see in future games as well. 7th Dragon released to good rating scores in Japan and sold over 102,000 copies over there, which was pretty good for brand new IP at the time. In 2011, a sequel, 7th Dragon 2020, was released on the Sony PSP. Imageepoch, Rieko Kodama, and Yuzo Koshiro returned for this game's development, but Moto was replaced by Mito Shiro for the game's character designs, which reflect a much more modern design fitting of the game's setting in a near-future Tokyo. 7th Dragon 2020 takes place in an alternate apocalyptic future 2020 Tokyo. Remember, this game was made in 2011. Dragons from space invade Earth and spread the toxic bloom everywhere, poisoning humans and mutating animals into hostile creatures. The player assumes the role of Dragon Hunting Unit 13, dispatched by the organization Murakumo to hunt down the dragons. In addition to selecting character classes, names, and appearance, players could also select Japanese voices for their characters. 7th Dragon 2020 has a bit more of an angled perspective on your party party that's portrayed in 3D, and instead of a world map, players can select parts of Tokyo unlocked through playing the game to explore. Yuzo Koshiro's electronic music in the game reflects a more modern Japan as opposed to the high fantasy world of Eden in the first game. Instead of 4-person parties, there are now 3-person parties, and the difficulty of the game was tuned to be a lot more forgiving to experimenting. It's still a challenging game, but I think the difficulty is a lot more fair and, in my opinion, a little more fun since you don't have to have a near perfectly synergized party with a highly optimized skill point allocation to succeed in the game. 7th Dragon 2020 also marks the 7th Dragon series' first partnership with Vocaloid singer Hatsune Miku. After rescuing her in the game, you can play the game in a special diva mode that changes all of the tracks in the game to Hatsune Miku's Vocaloid remixes. It's a pretty fun feature to mess around with, but I ultimately ended up going back to the original tracks. The classes in the game were also changed to reflect modern times, with the exception of the Samurai class, which made a return. The other classes are Trickster, Destroyer, Psychic, and Hacker. The setting, graphics, and scope of the game are completely different from the original 7th Dragon, which had a more classic fantasy setting, so the game aesthetically and audibly delivers a refreshing and very different vibe. But the gameplay itself is definitely an evolution of the first games. 7th Dragon 2020 sold 122,500 copies in the first week, and a sequel to this game was made by the same team called 7th Dragon 2022 in 2013. While Murakumo is focused on rebuilding, Unit 13 clears monsters from the Tokyo Sky Tower when suddenly a portal opens at the top and dragons start pouring out to attack humanity. America's Special Soldier Unit, Sect 11, arrives to supposedly assist in dealing with the dragons. Unit 13 must eliminate the dragons and deal with the humans that get in their way, too. The gameplay in 7th Dragon 2022 doesn't really change much, and Miku can be rescued in this game too, along with building her diva room to unlock the Vocaloid mixed tracks. The game also added an idol class and designs for the Rusil race from the original 7th Dragon. 7th Dragon 2022 sold 74,000 copies its first week, which was less than both of the previous games. This game was a little more challenging to play due to some rebalancing, but I don't think it changed enough from the first game to be too memorable on its own. That's not to say it was a bad game, it was just more of the same. One thing I do have to say about the 2020 games is that it's interesting to see the game developer's image of the year 2020 from 2011, looking back on it here in 2024 when I'm producing this video. Imageepoch, who developed the 7th Dragon games up to this point, along with some other notable tactical RPGs like Luminous Arc and Stella Glow, went bankrupt. So it was Sega that developed and published the last game in the series, 7th Dragon 3 Code VFD, which released in 2015 in Japan and 2016 in the West on the Nintendo 3DS. Miwashiro, Yuzo Koshiro, and Rieko Kodama kept their previous roles in the game's production. The game featured 8 customizable character classes with 40 voice options and 96 appearance options. Players could also have a party of up to 9 characters in their team. I'm not a huge fan of dating and social systems in RPGs, but I actually had a lot of fun with the bizarre dates you could go on in the game's headquarters. The game's base building system gave players the ability to build libraries, sky lounges, and even a cat cafe. Building these places also expanded on gameplay features. 7th Dragon 3 Code VFD takes place in Tokyo in the year 2100. Dragons descended on Earth and humanity is on the brink of extinction. The player teams up with video game company Nodens Enterprises to travel through time to weaken the dragon's balance of power and ultimately defeat the most powerful 7th Dragon, VFD. The game's story is actually really cool, and it has you revisit the settings from even the first game in the series, which definitely gives the appropriate sense of nostalgia to players of the first game. Like the other games in the series, there are a lot of cameos from popular characters in those games too, thanks to the time travel element. There is so much I loved about this game, but it had one single flaw that really kept me from elevating the game beyond just being good, and that was its difficulty. While it's not a simple game, I think that by significantly reducing the difficulty relative to the other games, it lost some of its unique charm as a 7th Dragon game. Don't get me wrong, the difficulty of the game is in line with most JRPGs, and probably won't bother anybody who has never played a 7th Dragon game before. But as someone hardened on the first 3 7th Dragon games, this game is a relatively much easier experience. The character designs, music, story, and gameplay were all really fun. The social elements were extremely casual and so weird I actually enjoyed them. Considering the human race was on the verge of extinction, it sort of fit the vibe. 7th Dragon 3 Code VFD sold 75,477 copies in its initial sales run in Japan according to MediaCrate, but I couldn't find information on Western sales numbers. All in all, not too bad for the final game in the series. The first 3 7th Dragon games never got official Western localizations, but there are very well done fan translations available to enjoy the games in English. And while emulation is always an option if it doesn't offend you, the PSP and 3DS 3DS can play the fan-translated games with the right DIY magic. They're all fun games that never got a fair chance in the West, but I think 7th Dragon 2020 will be the best game to start with for a lot of people who enjoy challenging JRPGs and want something more akin to a classic 7th Dragon experience, without being too unforgiving. If you're okay with using guides or starting over multiple times while you learn how the classes work, then the original 7th Dragon is a fun high fantasy experience. 7th Dragon 3 Code VFD should be fun for everyone else who doesn't mind missing out on a few of the older character cameos that would bring joy to veterans of the series. All of the games deliver a fun dungeon crawler-like experience with party creation without the first-person perspective. While not enough people played these games to put Yuzo Koshiro's musical work on them in the spotlight like a lot of his other tracks for more popular games, it's no less than the spectacular quality you'd come to expect from him. The original 7th Dragon's music sounds more akin to what you'd hear from his work on Etrian Odyssey, while his music for the other games has a very electronic and alien vibe to it. But some of the newer songs are just remixes of his older ones too. The games fittingly feature multiple battle tracks that reflect the severity of different kinds of encounters. And if Hatsune Miku Vocaloids are your jam, both 7th Dragon 2020 games have got your back. The 7th Dragon series was Rieko Kodama's last RPG series she produced at Sega before she passed away. Personally, I think she left us with some good games in the 7th Dragon series. If these games ever get modern platform ports, remasters, or remakes with Western localizations, it will definitely be something for fans of JRPGs to be excited about. Thank you for watching and have a great day.